Yeah, I'm part of the California Master Beekeeping program. Mark Carlson, who I think has talked to your club before, is my mentor, taught me how to speak bee. I'm very thankful to the whole Master Beekeeper program for taking me under their wing and teaching me how to beekeep. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Okay. Everybody see the slideshow up there? Perfect. Okay. So tonight I'm going to be talking about biosecurity. It's a big word, but it just means things we can do to help keep our bees healthy and prevent disease. Ways that we can keep it out of our bee operation. So mostly I'm going to be focusing on, that's talking about me, but Janine did such a wonderful introduction. I'm just going to skip ahead. I do work at the local animal shelter as my regular job, mostly as a cat and dog veterinarian, but I am seeing honeybees. And real quick for any veterinarians, if they're in the audience, I'll touch on this later too, but there's a wonderful group called the Honeybee Veterinary Health Consortium. It's a group of beekeepers, researchers, and veterinarians collaborating to get education out for veterinarians and beekeepers on collaboration, how we can together to help our bees. So biosecurity really is talking about how we prevent disease in the hive. This talk is going to focus mostly on hobbyist and sideliner beekeepers, non-migratory beekeepers. If anybody's doing a lot of pollination services, some of these rules are going to apply differently to you, and I don't touch on that aspect here. We're going to talk about American foul brood and European foul brood primarily, the diseases we're trying to prevent in our operation. We're going to talk about what we do if we do have a positive hive with either of those things. What options do we have to care for our animals? How do we find veterinary care? And we have to sometimes get creative. There are veterinarian beekeepers out there, but there are not a lot of us. So we might have to think of other ways to help get support. And then the prevention aspect, which I'm really passionate about. How do we keep this stuff out of our operation? How do we hopefully not have to deal with these diseases? How can we keep our bees healthy? So I'm going to first touch on a little bit about the immune system of the honeybee, because we think about honeybees differently than any other animal I've ever worked with in veterinary medicine, right? So we have the individual bees, but this is a super organism. We have the worker bees, the drones, the queen, the brood and the larva, the honey, the pollen, the propolis, all of it is this organism, superorganism together. So we can't just think of one bee's immune system. It's important. But we have to also think of the colony level immunity. What is helping the entire colony stay healthy? And then in our photo on the lower right, we have often multiple colonies in one apiary. So we can think of those, I compare them to cows or sheep in a herd. We think of this at the herd level, the whole apiary together. Bees have different ways to keep themselves healthy individually, but also at the colony level. So the colony level stress and the individual stress have an interplay here. So if the whole colony is stressed from a lack of floral resources, we had a harsh weather event, we can see that reflected in maybe not enough nutrition for our larvae that are growing. And vice versa, if we have a lack of population of worker bees to be able to go out and do the things that they need to do for the hive, or we have a queen that's having problems, she's not laying enough or any eggs to replenish that population, that then affects the individual. So the hive stress in total can really affect our whole bee population. Foul brood diseases are going to be given to the nurse bees in the feeding of the care of the brood. Let's see. Sorry, everybody. I wanted to see if I can close the view window here, but I'm not very technical on Zoom, so I apologize if I can't get that to shut. The foul brood diseases are given to the larvae from the worker bees, the nurse bees, as they're going around tending the hive, and they will pick it up from another worker bee and then give it to the larva. If you open your beehive and you see this, you should be really happy. This is a beautiful solid brood pattern. We got a little drone in the middle and a couple open cells. This is on black plastic foundation, so those larvae really stick out. But you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, we have some nice, chubby, healthy larvae that are in their cells down there. So if you open your hive and see this, you should be really happy about it. If we look at this photo here, and this is a hive affected by American foul brood, we start to see a shotgunned appearance. It's not evenly distributed across the brood there. If you look very close, you'll see a couple cells with sunken cappings and holes in the cappings. That's what the bees are doing when they sense there's something not quite right underneath that cap they've put on there. American foul brood is caused by a bacteria called Pinea bacillus larva. It's a spore-forming bacteria, and what this means is that we have the live form of the bacteria that infects other bees, but under certain conditions, it actually dehydrates itself and becomes this persistent little spore that can last for decades in equipment or in operation, especially in the woodenware, in the comb, in any of the things that you touch in your beekeeping operation, leather gloves. These spores can stick around, and even in the honey. In California, American foul brood is what we call a reportable disease. It means we have regulations about keeping it under control. These regulations were put in place, if you ever read historical bee texts, at the beginning of the 19th century, there were, 20th century, 1910s or so, outbreaks of American foul brood that just devastated operations, right? People would lose all of their bees to this. This is on a state-by-state basis, so not every state in the United States has American foul brood as a reportable disease, but we do here in California. And I can say comparatively to some other places, I've done some bee work in Michigan, our rates of American foul brood in California are much lower. And we have to say part of that is likely because we do have such a robust response to hives that are positive, because this is in theory something we can eliminate from the bees in the United States with enough persistence. Some people think so, but it is on a state-by-state basis to keep that going. So what that means by reportable is you have to talk to your county ag commissioner. If you have one that's active in beekeeping, you guys do, which is wonderful. They can assist you with the process there. There's also regulations that a sick colony has to be euthanized, something I take very seriously as a veterinarian. We're ending the life of an animal, and the equipment burned. The other colonies in the apiary or operation can be treated. The term is metaphylactically, treating everybody in the herd or the apiary with antibiotics. Depending for American foul brood, that's oxytetracycline. Tylosin is sometimes used, and lincomycin, which is very rarely used these days. Clinical signs of American foul brood: we can see a foul odor, a rotting fish or gym socks smell, I've heard it called. We see this shotgun brood pattern. The blue circles indicate some of the classic signs. So we can see this amber colored kind of water precipitation on top of the cappings, sunken cappings, and holes that the bees have poked, sensing that something is wrong. This is an active infection here, as if we have an older frame or a hive that we find later that was affected, we may find a hard scale adhered down in there. Larvae with American foul brood typically die after the cell has already been capped. We're going to contrast that, compare it with European foul brood in just a moment, which looks a little different, and know that we can have a hive that might have both. It's possible for that to happen. For European foul brood, this is a different bacteria, Melissococcus plutonius. It usually is instigated by, we think, poor weather, nutritional stress, something else is going on with the hive. We can also have it come into the operation with bees or frames or things we bring in. There is a known increased risk with certain crops of pollination. So this talks a little bit more about if you have anybody doing pollination service, the biosecurity rules maybe need to be a little more robust or slightly different, because blueberries seem to have a very high increased statistical risk for this disease to happen. It usually affects the larva before they have been capped. So we see those later instars, they look sick. They're described as twisted, misshapen, discolored, looking like they have a stomach ache. They will also dry down into a little rubbery scale, but it's not stuck in there the way it is with American foul brood. You can pull it out. Again, keep in mind, it could be both, but if you're seeing a lot of uncapped larvae with problems, it's much more likely to be the European foul brood that we're dealing with. This slide just contrasts the signs that we may see, and know that there is some overlap and there's some gray area. We're saying, is it one? Is it the other? How do we tell what our hive has, especially if you see a dead out or you see a hive that has expired some time ago? It might be really hard to tell what happened. So we talk about testing. How do we find out what's been happening with our bees? The matchstick test is one of my favorite ones. If you go and oh no, something's wrong, we're going to start here. For the matchstick test, talk about a wooden stick or a matchstick, but any hard, fibrous, pokey wooden thing will do. You want something with a little bit of texture. If you used a plastic thing, it might not work the same way. You're going to find a cell that looks sick, right? You're in your hive. I'm going to take that matchstick and stick it down into the cell and macerate it, swirl it around, and pull it out of the cell. It's going to be goopy or snotty. And we call this the rope test, is the other term I've heard for it. For American foul brood, that thing is going to be at least 2 centimeters long drawing out. Now, I've talked to a lot of beekeepers and they say EFB will come sometimes rope and goo out. Yes, absolutely some, but you're not going to get that 2 centimeter mozzarella cheese string out of there. Nice and long. If it is that long, over 2 centimeters, we consider that diagnostic. So if it looks like AFB, it ropes like AFB, that's probably what you have. Know that temperature and your technique can affect this. So if you don't have quite the right tool, you have plastic, or it's really cold outside, you may not get reliable results. And old frames that don't have this active proteolytic stage of the infection, they're not going to rope out like that. So we have to look for other things if it's a dead out or an older frame. If you do have a dead out on old frame, you're like, oh, there's nothing in there for me to rope. A ultraviolet flashlight is your best friend. So the scales from American foul brood will fluoresce or glow under black light. You have to turn the frame at an angle and shine it down into the cells to see it. The flashlight I used, I got them on Amazon for like 15 bucks. The hardware store should have them too. It's going to fluoresce tealish blue-green like we see in the slide here, but know that some types of pollen will fluoresce too. So you want to look at it under the plain light, see, oh, does that look like pollen? You might want to stick something down in there to see if it comes out like pollen, or if it's adhered in there and glowing, then I would be suspicious it could be American foul brood scale in there. Royal jelly can also fluoresce sometimes, so look at it under the plain light and under the black light as well. It's easier to see if you kind of have a coat you can put over your head, or you can take it into a dark barn shed, whatever you got nearby. A little easier to detect it with the black light test. The Holt's milk test is another great way to kind of determine, is this AFB? I'm not sure what I'm seeing. I want to check. The Pinabacillus larva or AFB bacteria produces very high levels of something called a proteolytic enzyme. What this does is melts the poor little bee larva. That's how we get our matchstick test string. It's melted larva. But it also means it's going to melt milk protein in a similar way. So you can use up to 1% milk powder in a barely there skim milk. We used to say incubate it in your pocket, but there is some new evidence from Dr. Peter Fowler out of Michigan that when we've done these tests in the lab, it really needs to be hive temperature. So we're talking about getting it up to at least 96, 97, 98. That's a warm pocket. So it depends what day you're doing this test. But if it's chilly outside, you may want to put it in a warm water bath to get a conclusive test. 98 degrees Fahrenheit or 37 degrees Celsius, give it 10 to 20 minutes. If it's positive, it's going to turn into this yucky iced tea brown you see in the bottom of the slide. That photo is credit of Randy Oliver. He does have instructions on his website for this too. If you've ever heard of Randy Oliver, most of you probably have. The sensitivity for this test is 93%, specificity 89%. What that means is how likely is this test to tell us what we're looking to find? So it is very, very sensitive. There's a low chance for false negatives, but you may miss some false positives. So it's not going to turn if it's not AFB, but you may miss some cases that really are AFB. The lateral flow test used to be a really reliable one we veterinarians would recommend. This works like our COVID testing, where you take a swab and you put it on the end, you put some liquid on it, and then the lines turn color. Unfortunately, due to some regulations at the FDA, I think these are limited now. They are made by Vita Bee Health. It's a European company, and we can't import them anymore for public sale. I used to just like buy mine at Better Bee and I would have them, but we can't do that anymore. It's restricted to import for research groups, meaning some agricultural institutions, land grant universities, regulatory authorities, or researchers can still get them. But we, you and me as regular beekeepers and even regular veterinarians are having a really hard time trying to find these tests or get the import permit, because the quantity you have to buy to get them in is just like so high. It's thousands and thousands of dollars to do so and get the permit. So while these used to be really reliable, they're harder to get now, and they do expire after a year. So if you do have some, treasure them, but know they may not be valid after their expiration date. And especially for American foul brood, we don't have any published data on how reliable this test is. We do for European foul brood, but for American foul brood, compared to like the Holt's milk test, which we know is pretty reliable, or the matchstick roping out over 2 centimeters, we're not sure how many cases we're missing or misidentifying with this particular test. So use it with a grain of salt if you have them available. This is an updated thing. If any of you saw this talk on camp before, I did it last year. This is a new technique, and I am talking more directly to any veterinarians in the audience here. Although, if you do have a microscope, if you work in the sciences, nursing, this is something you could learn to do at home as well, if you're good with your microscopy. This is called the modifying hanging drop method. This is what some of them are doing at the USDA. So this is a DIY way to do some of the testing they're doing at the Beltsville lab. The Michigan Pollinator Initiative has at their Bees Need Vets website. This is publicly available. Anybody can go there. There's a YouTube video on how to do this, instructions, everything you would need to know to run this test if you wish to. The really great thing about the hanging drop method, again, the USDA is using it, it's very, very sensitive, almost 98%. It outperformed those lateral flow tests for detecting and identifying correctly American foul brood. A lot of these things are supplies that a veterinarian would have on hand. If there's any vets in the audience, I say this is as easy as doing an ear cytology, which we do every day to see what's in that dog's ear causing an ear infection, just as easy. You do need a couple different specific pieces of equipment, a specific immersion oil for your microscope, a specific stain, but the cost on those isn't too bad. We're talking maybe $30 to have those supplies. They're going to last you a long time. You want to get a really good sample for European foul brood, which you can identify in this as well. You want a larva that's just starting to deflate and lose its shape, but still has a little bit of shape. For American foul brood, we actually find the highest number of spores, which is what we're identifying on this, in one of those old black scales. You kind of got to scrape it and pull it out of the cell, put it carefully in your white top tube, macerate it before we start this test. The nice thing about this too is you can collect samples at the apiary, or the beekeeper can collect samples when they do their inspection and say, oh, let me grab some samples while I'm in here. I'm going to carefully seal them and save them for later and get this tested, close back up the hive, and then take your action. So you don't have to reopen the hive to get the samples. Someone can collect these ahead of time and they're going to be stable for you. I just really like that picture on the left. That is the first woman in Europe to be a veterinarian. So Agnes Schulberg. The best way to know for sure, so we covered matchstick test, Holt's milk test, the lateral flow test, which we can't get anymore, and the new to us hanging drop method that if you have microscopy skills is great to use, but you can always send a sample to the USDA, right? And I would encourage everybody to always do this if you are suspicious about what's going on in your hive. They can do a couple additional things to the prior tests. They can also tell you if there's antibiotic resistance, if AFB or EFB are found, then are they resistant to the antibiotic oxytetracycline, which is the most commonly used one we have. It's not on this slide, but some recent statistics out of Texas is the one that comes to mind. About 40% of their AFB cases now are resistant to oxytetracycline. California, we're doing quite a bit better. Again, AFB is reportable here. Our rates are much smaller than in Texas, but the USDA can give you that additional information. You do have to request it when you send the sample in. For sample guidelines, the USDA has a wonderful guide on their website of how to do it, but big important points, no honey. We really just need the brood comb. Honey is going to mess up their diagnostic equipment, give them a bad day when they get it. They may reject your sample because the honey is going to cause a problem. We want to wrap it in a paper, towel, newspaper, heavy cardboard box. If it's in plastic, it will degrade too quickly, and we get we call it secondary pathogens in there, other bacteria causing problems, confounding our results. You need about a 2 by 2 inch section of the brood comb, about your hive tool, cut out there. If you're having trouble getting a good sample like that, you can send in your matchstick probe. You can send in something in a to your vet's white top tube or sterile container and mail it to them. And they may be able to get results still from that. So don't feel deterred if you can't get that full piece without honey. Try to get the best you can, but I encourage you to always request antibiotic resistance testing if you send one in. Here is the address to send it to. It's also on the USDA website. Many counties in California have agricultural commissioners that have training or are collaborating with their local bee clubs and may be able to assist you with this. Not all counties, but many. And so if you're not sure in your area, I would encourage you to connect with them. They hopefully can help you at least find out where to go to or what to do. What do we do? So a little bit of a review again, but a colony that's sick with American foul brood. This is a highly contagious bacterial disease. In California, it is reportable. If you think that you're dealing with AFB, we do have to act swiftly to prevent the spread to the other animals in your apiary and to your neighbors and to their neighbors. If you're not sure what you're seeing, or even if you are, ask for help from your local club or your master beekeeper. I know there can often be a little bit of a stigma about AFB in beekeeping. People are worried that they don't want anyone else to know they have it, but you got to ask for help. And so I'm certain that a master beekeeper will be confidential if you say, hey, I need help. Can you help me look at this? What do I do with it? They know enough to keep it quiet and assist you. And it's better to deal with the problem and keep the rest of your animals safe. We had a case in San Francisco where we had a beekeeper with 5 hives. One was sick, asked for help with our master beekeeper. We did have to euthanize that one hive, but we were able to save the other ones. And so if you act swiftly, you can get it under control, hopefully. We do have to euthanize the hive. It should be destroyed the evening the day it was discovered. The reason I say evening is we want to wait until all those worker bees are back in there for the superorganism, the whole animal. Worker bees, brood, and queen need to be euthanized. Some places you can burn the hive. For us, where I beekeep, we cannot get an open burn permit in San Francisco. There's nowhere to go. They won't let us do it. So we have partnered with a local pet crematorium that can assist us with proper disposal. We don't want to ever leave the hive either euthanized and unsealed, or frankly, still in the yard longer than possible, because the risk is other bees are going to come in and potentially rob out that hive, take that disease back to them. So the swifter we can deal with it, it is saving the other bees. In some states where American foul brood is not a reportable disease, you can use the shook swarm method and treat with antibiotics. I know some beekeepers in California do that, but I'm going to tell you it is reportable for a reason. And that reason helps keep our rates low here. So I'm going to encourage that everybody follow the Honeybee Health Coalition's recommendation that if it is positive, a sick animal with American foul brood, we do euthanize and burn that hive, even if it's not required by law. For European foul brood, we can be a little bit more optimistic. Again, this is not spore forming. It's not going to necessarily persist the same way we worry about American foul brood. For some beekeepers, if EFB is really rare in your area and you don't have any other beekeepers around, you just caught a new swarm and you go, oh shoot, it's got European foul brood, you may want to call that beehive from your operation, right? I know that's sad to say, but if this has never been a problem before, you just introduced some new stock, they're having problems, you may just want to take both those genetics and that brood out of there. We may not all have that liberty of space, right? And so watchful waiting is also reasonable under some circumstances. Many beekeepers think this might be nutritionally based as well. So supplemental feeding, making sure they're warm, making sure they have everything they need, sealed up nicely, that your moisture is well controlled, removing the highly affected frames. If you look at a frame and it's very highly affected, maybe pull it out, replace it with some dry comb for her to start laying new in, reducing stress. Hygienic queens can often help reduce the rates of this because those worker bees are going to more likely pull out diseased larvae quickly for you. And then, of course, antibiotics may be needed. It's very reasonable to treat with antibiotics. It's a bacterial disease. For European foul brood, we still, want to think about this at the colony level and then the apiary level. This information here comes from, again, Dr. Milbrath in the Honeybee Medicine for Veterinary Practitioners book, but she teaches out of Michigan State. And so we think that there might be a lot of inapparent infection. And I've heard this from beekeepers too. They're like, oh, maybe they just got a little bit of AFB and they cleared it. Is that possible? Yeah, we're not sure. There's a lot of great researchers working on this right now to know how much inapparent infection is there in the whole apiary. But for that reason, and because bees go into different hives and they do things that we can't control, we have to look at this as the whole apiary together. So if you have one hive affected, everybody else in that yard should be under treatment and watchful waiting, whatever treatment you decide. Colonies that are really, really high risk, and working bees in agriculture, those bees that are getting shipped across the country to help pollinate our food, especially those colonies going to blueberry pollination, where we know European foul brood is extremely high. Sometimes we are using antibiotics not quite prophylactically before disease, but just because we know disease is at such high prevalence in those operations, the recommendations are a little different than what I'm going to have for our sideliner beekeepers and our backyard beekeepers, because those bees that are working or doing a pollination service job, they're not necessarily making honey for us or honey that we're going to consume. They're still going to make it, and we don't want to eat it. After all, I'm in it for the honey. You might see a familiar face on the left-hand side. That's Master Beekeeper Mark Carlson. He teaches a class on mead. That's honey he's harvesting from his hive. And then two mead makers that are in my family on the right-hand side. So we love to consume our honey. We want to make products out of it. We eat it. I give it to friends and family. So I bring this up because we just talked a lot about antibiotic use, and then we're going to talk about what antibiotics do in the hive and how we keep it out of the food product that these bees are making for us, because we don't want to consume antibiotics, right? So antibiotics and honey, I'm going to talk a little bit about antibiotic residue. What this means is the antibiotic itself that isn't consumed or metabolized by the animal, but also the things that are metabolized by the animal that ends up in the honey. I compare this to cows and milk. If you give the cow an antibiotic, it's going to end up in the milk for a certain period of time. So we call that withdrawal, the time after the last dose of antibiotic has been administered before we want to consume any of these products from the animal. For oxytetracycline, the antibiotic used most in honeybee medicine, that's 6 weeks after the last dose of antibiotic has been applied before we want anything to do with consuming this honey. For tylosin, there's 2 different opinions you will find on the internet. One says 4 weeks. However, another recommendation, that's published data, not necessarily from studies in honeybees. We have other recommendations that say should only ever be applied in the fall and that the residue may last for 12 weeks. I personally would not trust a hive consuming the honey from it with tylosin until 12 weeks, because that seems to be the most updated data, but you will see some resources that say only 4. And oxytetracycline, the one you're going to encounter most often, 6 weeks after the last dose. How do we know how long these antibiotics are in there? We've done a lot of testing on international samples and in the United States to know how long they persist. And I have bad news for honey from the grocery store. And that is, at least in the European Union, when a lot of it was tested, we saw things like tetracyclines, oxytetracyclines, but also fluoroquinolones and sulfonamides. Those antibiotics are what I think of as our big guns for human and animal health. What are they doing in a honeybee hive? Well, we don't know if maybe those beekeepers from international places have adequate training, good agricultural practices. Maybe they don't know. Maybe they aren't being monitored on their export. But the antibiotics are ending up in this big store honey. It can cause anaphylaxis for people, reactions. It can also lead to antibiotic resistance, which we are seeing with oxytetracycline more and more, that the antibiotics that used to work don't work as well anymore. What better advertisement is there for your own backyard honey for people, right? Why go to Costco and get the honey bear full of honey that we don't know, 1, is it honey, and 2, what's in it, when you know that your hives are producing delicious, wonderful honey, you know it's safe, it's for your friends and family. I think that's one of the best advertisement us smaller scale beekeepers can have. On the honeybees, these antibiotics also affect their immune system. So, really this is something that, unless there are working bees in agriculture that know they're at super high risk, we don't want to be using prophylactically. On studies in bees, this is going to deplete their own good, healthy probiotics in their gut. The bees that were studied that had antibiotics applied to their hive, they have decreased caproot counts. The adult bees' immune function was not as good. And then the antibiotics don't do anything for the spore form of American foul brood. So you may suppress an infection by treating it, but you're not going to get rid of it. And that means under the right conditions, the next year, it's going to come back like a fire that wasn't put out. The same thing, this is kind of tough economically, but if we have honey from a dead out, we don't know what happened, or we have honey from a hive we know was affected, unfortunately, we're going to have to discard it because those spores can go over to the new hive. So if you're practicing open feeding, which we shouldn't be doing, or you're moving honey from a dead out to a hive that's healthy, you do risk giving them anything that the hive that left had. I had to tell our poor beekeeper in San Francisco, he's like, oh, I had the whole flow hive on top of this poor hive that had American foul brood. And I'm like, I know, but we've got to get rid of it. Thankfully, from his other hives, after the antibiotics, he still got a pretty good crop this year. We had to sacrifice that one flow hive super though. I've heard a lot of, what about using other things? And I'm really hopeful that over time we can have a more natural thing than antibiotics, or something different that will help. Dr. Megan Milbrath has done a lot of literature review of these things. We have a lot of stuff that can help. Help the bee's immune system, help reduce the chance, help reduce the bacterial load, but nothing is as effective as antibiotics. So far. And so, we do recommend using antibiotics for the other hives in an apiary that had an AFB affected hive, or if you have EFB, a European foul brood that is just not clearing up with watchful waiting and feeding, reaching for antibiotics does work. How do you get your antibiotics? So they come in two forms, either a veterinary feed directive, which is issued by a veterinarian. This gives you a premix. So this is basically powdered sugar with some vitamins and minerals and your antibiotic already in it. It comes in two sizes from Mannlicher to Daunt. There's a size for maybe 5 or less hives, and then there's a bigger bag, and then there's a super, super big bag. It's ready to be applied. You do have to submit the VFD or veterinary feed directive paperwork to them to get this order, and then they ship it to you, or you can take it to the depot if you live close enough to drive there. The other way to get it is something called a prescription. This is just like, hey, your dog, your cat, or your cow need an antibiotic. The veterinarian prescribes it for you. Oxytetracycline or terramycin, I order it from my veterinary supplier, and then I measure it out just like we would an antibiotic for another animal. This means the beekeeper has to mix it themselves, either into powdered sugar or sugar syrup, and it'd be fed in a liquid that way. You're doing it for either way, either the premix or the prescription once it's mixed up. 3 applications at 4 to 5 days in a row. If you're doing the dry form, the dusting, it's the outer edges of the frame. If you do put it across the middle, it will kill any uncapped brood that's there in the powdered sugar content. And then again, the withdrawal period is 6 weeks after the last dose. So you're doing 3 dustings, 4 to 5 days apart. And then after that last one, you start counting your 6 weeks until your honey is safe for consumption. Working with veterinarians. So I just said we've got to get a veterinary feed directive or a prescription from a veterinarian to be able to get our antibiotics. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we get a veterinarian to get our antibiotics, because that is an important step. And the first thing, and this is a bit under California law, if there's veterinarians in the audience, you're pretty familiar with this. It's called a veterinary client-patient relationship. It's between the vet and the owner guardian of the animal or animals. Either it's a whole dairy of cows, it's a single dog, it's an apiary of bees. What this means is that we know enough about you, the animal haver, and your operation to help you and us together make good decisions for your animals. That we know enough about what's going on to make a preliminary or general diagnosis, and that we're acquainted by you. We can come to see your operation or your animal, or you bring your animal to us, not so much with bees. This relationship is renewed annually or a year. So much like going to your own physician, you need a prescription refill, you have to go back once a year or so. Same type of concept, same type of thing for your dog, cat, horse, or cow. We need this for our honeybees as well. Your veterinarian may not know anything about bees, and that is one point I want to make here. I started out as a veterinarian first and then became a beekeeper. I didn't know anything about bees about 5 years ago, other than I thought they were cool. I wanted to save them. I love bees, but I've learned a lot more about beekeeping since then. Some pro tips that can help you in working with a veterinarian. At HBBC, the Honeybee Veterinary Consortium, there is a pre-filled veterinary feed directive. That is one of the most complicated steps of this whole thing, is some of the paperwork. But once you familiarize yourself with this, it gets really easy. It has your withdrawal time acknowledgement written on there. We as vets have to keep paperwork for 3 years after. We help you out for things, so you get a copy, we get a copy, and we can keep it in your file. The diagnostics for your bees can be done before your vet comes out. When I went to see a beekeeper, he had already collected samples. He said, I think this is what I have. Can you come out and confirm? I said, absolutely, I can. But it doesn't mean your vet has to come and open the hive and go through every frame with you, right? Like if you have collected samples ahead of time, maybe you've worked with your county ag commissioner, maybe you have a diagnosis, that is all really, really useful when you do get a veterinarian out to your apiary. Expect a reasonable fee for time and coming out there. Gas for the F-150 is not getting any cheaper. And your vet does have to come make a site visit to at least see your yard, talk with you, be, again, that client-patient relationship, be familiar enough with what's going on in your operation. And, you know, if you've got samples ahead of time, that saves you both a lot of time. If you have a diagnosis, or you work with your ag commissioner, and you know ahead of time what's going on, saves you both a lot of time, can hopefully help keep that cost a little lower than if a vet's coming out and helping you do a full hive inspection on several hives. And your vet may not be a beekeeper at all, but they have to be available to follow up with you. So if you do a course of antibiotics and things aren't working, you want somebody that's willing to come back out again, not just somebody who said, yeah, you know, thanks for the email, I'll send it to you. And then if you have a vet that you really like for your dog, your cat, your horse, your cow, and they've never seen bees before, I know so many vets that got so excited to work with bees. I'm one of them. It stimulates our brain. We get so excited to learn something about a new animal. So honey and kindness go a really long way to getting somebody to help you. I call it sweeten the deal. You know, see if you can get somebody. If there's nobody in your area that knows bees, see what you can do to collaborate with somebody to help you out. This is resources for veterinarians, but this is also publicly available stuff for anybody who is interested in getting more into, you know, how do we navigate this relationship? Because just being very honest, there are not very many honeybee labeled veterinarians out there. The Honeybee Veterinary Consortium has tons of resources that is open to anybody, beekeepers and vets, to help collaborate. The Camp Master Beekeeper program has a 1.5 hour, I think it's a 2-hour class online all about bees and veterinarians in that relationship. If you are a vet, this gives you 1.5 hours of CE. We have to do every 2 years to keep our license. So, you know, you can kind of double dip there, learn about bees and get some more licensing credits. The USDA also has free courses. One is on the veterinary feed directive. The other one is entirely on the role of honeybees in bee health. It does focus a lot on migratory beekeeping, but it covers American foul brood, how we detect it, what we do, all of these things that I covered a little bit earlier. And those are free to anybody. Again, the USDA courses help for our veterinary accreditation if we're USDA accredited, and also CE credits, and it's free, so I can't talk those up enough. If you have a bee-friendly vet who hasn't done a hive dive yet, feel comfortable sharing this information with them. They can get some free CE. It also might be good for you too. And then, you know, my biggest prop here, join your local beekeepers club. If you're a vet and you're interested, get to know some friendly beekeepers in your area. That's how I got started. I had somebody so kind enough to take me out and do a hive dive, and I was hooked. So be part of the community. This is an update. I know y'all might have heard about the vaccine for honeybees. I'm afraid I don't have a lot of great update news, but I'm going to touch on it quickly. Delan Animal Health has started making a vaccination. It's given orally or eaten by the queen. Her attendants feed it to her after taking it out of queen candy for 7 days. This is coming from certified beekeepers that are breeding queens and then vaccinating them. They're selling them at about a $20 to $50 premium over a regular queen to say that she has been vaccinated. In the studies that Delan Animal Health has done, about 30 to 50% of the larvae survived exposure to high doses of American foul brood. So that's really promising. In their field tests, 14% of hives were PCR. That's a DNA detection, really highly sensitive test for American foul brood prior to vaccine, and 0% after. But what we've learned from Brittany Kyle out of Guelph University research is when they did these tests, they were also doing the shook swarm method at the same time. Now, I don't want to be a downer on the vaccine. It's very promising. We want to be really optimistic about it, especially for a disease that we have to euthanize a sick patient for. I'm really hopeful that this will prove to be something useful for beekeepers. But we have to keep in mind the vaccine alone isn't going to be enough. They also had to do the shook swarm. And a really good point that I had discussed with Janine as well, just a vaccine doesn't make a good queen. You want to make sure you're also getting a queen that is hygienic, that is otherwise healthy, that has the attributes you want. So if you are shopping for a vaccinated queen, also look into the genetics of that queen. Otherwise, see that she is hygienic enough, gentle enough, nice enough for your operation. And if she's vaccinated, then that may be worth the money bonus for you. You have to do the economics yourself. Biosecurity. So we're finally to the meat and potatoes. We're kind of at the end of the presentation, but this is how we prevent getting these infections in our hive. This is the exciting stuff about keeping things clean, which Hopefully we'll make this a little exciting for you. We can't control where our bees go, but we can control what we do as the beekeeper. So it's kind of accepting the things we cannot change and control, but doing what we can anyway. This means cleanliness and sanitization in the operation, quarantining sick hives, sick yards, or new bees coming into an established operation, doing your hive inspections regularly, routinely, and consistently, and then managing your dead outs, which is being the best beekeeping neighbor you can be. How does a hive get infected? Well, we know they rob other hives, especially hives within 1 kilometer are at really high risk. So we have a dead out hive, all of the bees within 1 kilometer of them are at risk because they want to go in and get the honey. They're doing what bees do. They're being practical. In San Francisco here, all of our hives are like within 1 kilometer of each other. We have no space. Hopefully some of you have a lot more room up there to be safe, but we have to be really aware that if we have a colony that's sick or dying, it's a risk for those around it. Drifting within an operation, the studies that have been done on this, it doesn't seem to introduce enough spores to be a problem of the drifting bees, but there is some research that small hive beetle, those nasty little beetles, they can bring it in. So they burrow in the soil, they get in your hive, and as they're bringing that dirt and bacteria in, they may be introducing American foul brood spores into your hive. So robbing small hive beetle, definitely high risk to become infected. We also have vertical transmission. If we're doing splits and we didn't know something was in the operation, we can split it between the hives we create from there. And potentially for swarming. Now we think, if a hive is really sick, they're probably not going to be reproductively robust enough to swarm. But that's when we go, oh, I found a late season swarm. And we have to ask ourselves, is this a swarm or was this an absconded hive for another reason? And so that's why I say if you do have enough space in your operation, you may want to set up a quarantine area where you can put new bees that are coming in that you purchased or new bees that you've caught separate from your big honey producing hives and your best girls. That way you can monitor them and make sure that they are actually healthy before you get them close enough to everybody else. If you have an out yard over 1 kilometer away, that's ideal if you can have a separate yard for that. Horizontal transmission, this is what we can control. So this is what the beekeeper does, and this is our biggest risk factor here, besides robbing, for what can cause problems in our hive. Either, moving tools between hives, the leather beekeeping gloves. I do sometimes wear leather for inspection. Can be a fomite or something that carries bacteria from one hive to another. Purchasing equipment, purchasing used equipment from beekeepers you don't know, very risky, don't recommend it. If you're getting equipment from a mentor that you know and trust, they know their stuff. Used equipment can be a really good way to save some money. But I've also seen some ads for used brood comb on Facebook Marketplace that just, I get so worried about that type of thing because you may think that you're saving yourself a little bit of money getting that. And then unfortunately, you've introduced a problem into your apiary you didn't have before. Even feeding honey from other colonies that you don't know or store-bought honey, be careful with those types of activities because we can be causing this movement of bacteria and disease. For sanitization, fire is our best friend, fire and comet cleaner. So cleaning your hive tool really, really well, scorching them in your smoker. Leather beekeeping gloves, my best recommendation is to have them yard dedicated. I go to Tractor Supply and I buy like 6 pairs of the nice deerskin gloves. I know I'm spending a lot of money on it, but I have 1 per yard. And that way, if there's a problem in that yard, I can dispose of those leather gloves and not cry too much, just like $12 from Tractor Supply, and not be so worried that I'm moving stuff between operations. I do encourage people to learn to inspect at least hives are friendly or non-defensive hives, known good girls, with nitrile gloves because those are much easier to clean and disposed of. Remember that your smoker bellows, if they're leather, can also be a fomite because you can't get it quite clean enough. So if you have more than 1 yard, a smoker per yard, a set of leather gloves per yard, maybe even think of a bee suit or wash your bee suit. I had a couple beekeepers in my local club get so mad at me for even suggesting to wash their bee suit. They had a competition and who had not washed it the longest. If it's staying in one yard, it's just your bees, you're fairly safe. But if you are taking it to your friend's house to say, hey, can you help me look at this hive? I'm worried about it. That's absolutely when you need to wash your suit before you come back to your own bees, right? Because if you're looking at a sick animal, you don't want to bring that home. If you're in your own yard and you find a sick animal, that's when you go, okay, well, I was in there, I found a problem. Before I go on to the next hive, I'm going to change my gloves. I'm going to get a fresh tool, right? Have more than one hive tool, because once you're in that sick brood, you can take it directly to the next hive you're inspecting. So pause. If you find a problem, pause, change your stuff out. Better Bee has great instructions for how to wash your beekeeping clothing safely. So they have a nice little way to make sure that you preserve it while you keep it nice and clean. For purchasing equipment, I did touch on this already, but novice beekeepers should really ask for help, right? Trust your senior beekeepers to have your best interest in mind, especially if they're master beekeepers. They know what they're doing. Only get new equipment from reliable suppliers or people that you know have your best interest in heart. Feeding your bees to prevent robbing, Boardman feeders or front entrance feeders are a really big risk, not only for robbing from honeybees, but we also can encourage our yellow jackets and our ants to come in for that. And we never want to open feed. It seems really easy to put that super stickies out there and just let them take care of it. But you don't know whose bees are coming in there. And then you also get other pests bringing other problems in there if you do open feed. Metal robbing screens or entrance reducers can also help your risk of robbing. Never, ever feed store-bought honey. It doesn't make economic sense. Just make your own fresh sugar syrup. You can add vitamins to it if you want to, but store-bought honey should never be used because we know there's antibiotics and other problems in it. For your comb and honey management, every year we should be replacing about 20% of our oldest and darkest brood comb for a couple reasons. It helps reduce the buildup of pesticides and other stuff in the wax that's in there and can cause a problem. If that hive has ever had antibiotics before, that can end up in the wax. We want to replace it. If you are going to help build up a hive by transferring a frame, this was kind of the weirdest thing that I learned with honeybee medicine. We can just take like a slice of bees from this hive and put them in this other hive over here, and we can move them around. We can move worker bees. We can transpose the hive's positions and the bees will go in the other hive. It's like a blood transfusion if we're moving brood over, right? So if you're going to do that, make sure it's coming from a healthy hive. Know that the hive that is donating to your smaller hives or making your splits and nukes are nice and healthy before you start it. Wax and pollen and honey can also have contaminants in it. So if we're moving those frames, make sure it's coming from a healthy one. Be very wary of reusing supplies from dead outs when you don't know what happened. Keeping your apiary neat and tidy. The little burr comb pieces that come out, the spilled sugar syrup can attract pests. Again, small hive beetle, yellow jackets, other bees, and keep it nice and stored properly to prevent pests. I'm beating a dead out here with this again, but it is so important. The best thing we can do as a beekeeping neighbor is to take care of our dead outs in a quick fashion. So a little bit of review, but consider quarantining newly caught swarms or absconds and purchases from your healthy honey producing colonies. Hives that have been in a yard with a hive, other hives in a yard that were affected with either European foul brood or AFB should be monitored for about a year before you move them anywhere else. And that also comes back to the dedicated yard tools, smoker, gloves, bee suit if you can. Keep it with that yard to reduce it moving any type of spore or bacterial problem to another piece of your operation. Your discarding of old woodenware, we do have to follow our county regulations. Your ag inspector is going to be able to assist you with that. discarding and properly burning your hives if they're euthanized, or your woodenware. Don't leave old woodenware around. Your bees will find it. They're too smart. And hives within 1 kilometer are most at risk. Be a good beekeeping neighbor. Protect your community. Trust them to help protect you too. Megan Milbrath, she's a great researcher. I quote her a lot, but she has this idea that if everybody over time got AFB slowly out of their operations with diligence and practice, we may be able to eradicate AFB from beekeeping. This is a long-term project, folks, right? But the parts of this are important. Monitoring frequently enough that we can tell where there's problems. Knowing what it looks like to identify it and being prepared to act quickly. Take your samples, ask for help if you're not sure, or even if you are, ask for help to help deal with it. And then get veterinary assistance to treat your other animals. It saves your bees. Early detection saves hives, the other hives in your apiary, okay? Your apiary inspection service, state or your county can help you out. And then keep monitoring, take action to prevent robbing, to keep the rest of the bees and your bee community safe. That is it. I think we wrapped up with enough time for some questions, if there's any out there. Yeah, thanks everybody.
We do have some questions. Let's see. David Giuliano asked if you know the time turnaround now for the Beltsville lab giving us an answer if a sample has AFB.
Yeah, it is long. And so there's one guy, his name is Sam, and he does all of the testing at Beltsville. And so especially during certain times of the year, it may be weeks until we get an official answer from Beltsville. I still encourage people to send it in and ask for that antibiotic resistance report. That is still very useful, even if you do get it back a few weeks later. But in the meantime, we may need to start utilizing these other tests, right? So our matchstick test, our Holt's milk test, which is really reliable when incubated at the right time and temperature, a lateral flow if you have access to it, and then collaborating with veterinarians to start to use more of this hanging drop test, which is what Beltsville's doing initially to identify it so we can get a quick answer, hopefully point of care where the bees are, take action for the bees, and then know from the Beltsville results, hey, can I trust that oxytetracycline is going to clear this up? Or do I need to think about a follow-up and using something else or additional? How watchful do I need to be? So a long answer, but it is prolonged. Hopefully, times from Beltsville, hopefully some of these other tests can help us out in the meantime.
Do you think that UC Davis is going to be doing AFB and EFB testing soon for us?
Yeah,
That's quicker.
I would love if that was true, Janine. Maybe we can all manifest it into happening, but that's not official news, so I can't say that that is for sure happening. But gosh, wouldn't that be an advantage to be able to just send it to Davis instead of the whole way to Maryland to get an answer? But yeah, I'm hopeful that might be something that could be in the future for us.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
David, I hear Dick in the background.
Yeah, you didn't mention, or at least I didn't hear you mention the little, what are they, immunoassay test kits that you can buy from the suppliers, you know, for AFB and EFB. Are those reliable? Are you recommending those?
Oh, yeah.
Meaning to mention those?
Yeah, I called those the lateral flow tests. So I think we're
Oh, yeah,
talking
right.
about,
Okay, yeah, right, that.
So I used to use those all the time. I could buy them from Better Bee. Those are the tests that now we're having difficulty getting them imported. It's a governmental permit thing. You can't buy them from Man Lake or Better Bee anymore until something changes with the government. And so they are, at least for EFB, European Foul Brood, pretty reliable. We don't have statistics on how reliable they are for AFB, American Foul Brood, but the difficulty is we just can't get them right now. So we're having to rely on other testing methods. I hope that changes as well.
Okay.
And I'm wondering if David would speak. He did put a chat out, to let everyone know that Dr. Flores at Humboldt Veterinary Group is currently our vet, the only one who will prescribe. And David acts as a liaison between the beekeeper and Dr. Flores. So David put his phone number, his work phone number, on the chat. And I'm not sure if he wants to say anything more.
Yeah, I mean, we've had run into a brick wall getting the test, so I know now that it's not just us. So unfortunately, with that out of the way, I mean, I'll look into the whole smell test and some other things, but so basically, if it has all the characteristics of AFB, we should treat it as such.
Yes, in the lack of being able to have those lateral flow tests, we need to kind of partner beekeepers, vets, ag commissioners together to be, if we are as a group suspicious enough that this is what's happening, to collect our samples for USDA, but take action, right? And as long as we're using antibiotics responsibly, we have a high suspicion that this is what's going on. I'm so glad you all have a veterinarian that's wanting to collaborate with your group, because in medicine, we rarely have a definitive answer, but if we've got 3 people saying, hey, you know what, this looks like it, we should probably take quick action to move forward with taking care of the affected hive, but also those other hives in the apiary, getting them treated, because that's where we can really reduce the spread in the community. Swift action with the other hives as well.
And I'm wondering if you would be willing, if you come up here, to help us, practice with a microscope so that we can do, I think you have some good microscopes, David, and
I'll have to check. I mean, generally we just use our dissecting scope for weed and pest ID. We do have a compound microscope. I'm just not sure, how good it is.
Well, I bet the club could help.
Yeah. But then I also had a question about we've run into recent problems with being able to burn hives off-site in the past. Humboldt Bay Fire helped us. We went to their practice facility and they did a container burn and actually had a lot of fun doing it. Thought it was really cool. And recently it's been absolutely not, we're not going to do that anymore.
Yeah.
So I wasn't aware that crematoria was an option, and we do have Eureka Pet cremation. Do you have information that you could send if there is anything in terms of what needs to be done and all for that I could take to the crematorium?
Absolutely. We had a very similar situation. We used to have we'd have a fire at Ocean Beach if we had to do it, and it was a great time. The club members talk about it if we had a hive, but now we have to use a pet crematorium. For us in San Francisco, what we have to do is get first permission from our county ag inspector to transport it to the pet crematorium in writing. An email suffices. So them saying, hey, we know why we're moving it. Yes, you can move it. And then I can share this after the call too, but we had just a conversation with the pet crematorium. Hey, this is what this box is. It may contain plastic, metal, wax, bees, and making sure they were comfortable with it. We have several in the area that won't do it. We do have one excellent one called Golden State Pet Crematorium that 3 of the beekeeping clubs, surrounding county beekeeping clubs, we all use the same group. So if you do find someone near you that is useful, it would be really great to also share it with other, I don't know how many clubs are close to you up in Humboldt, but have it be a local kind of hub resource to have that. So David, I can certainly share some of my notes with you after the call about the specifics of communication there, but the Ag Commissioner's permission in writing was needed to take it over there. What else can I answer for you about that?
Yeah, I mean, we'd be able to take it
Yeah.
to do the permission pretty easily. But yeah, it's just the last AFB positive hive we had was just we were just running into brick walls everywhere. No local fire wanted to deal with it anymore.
Yeah. And having that conversation with the pet crematorium, you know, when you don't have a hive waiting to
Right.
be disposed of preemptively, which we didn't do. And now I have learned, and I'm happy to share that advice with you. So I'm happy to help any way I can there.
And let's see, Mary had a couple of questions. Mary, are you present?
She's muted.
Yeah. So my first question was, when hives are being treated with antibiotics for AFB, when they were in the same apiary as the hive that gets euthanized, are those hives closed up to prevent the bees from flying during the time of treatment?
Not usually, right? So that'd be a pretty long confinement time. And so it's not convention to close those up. If we have a hive that has been euthanized, we want to seal it, right? Completely dispose of it as quickly as possible. That's your biggest robbing risk. We know that drift isn't a huge problem. So thankfully, if we take care of the sick animal and treat the others with antibiotics, usually turns out okay. Yeah, but we
Great,
always want
thank
to
you.
go back in and re-inspect and make sure it
Okay.
did what we wanted. Yeah.
I asked that before you got to the slide about drift. My second question was, if you could review once more what quarantining a hive would look like, especially if a beekeeper doesn't have a second apiary.
Yeah.
Or an apiary that's a second one that's more than a kilometer away. Is it still possible to quarantine a hive? Let's say you purchased a package of bees, or you caught a swarm. What might that look like?
Yeah, so, and I have a really less than an acre that I'm using for my hives. So it wouldn't be, I guess, by the book, a true quarantine, but what I would do is have them on a separate hive stand, right? A separate hive stand as many feet away as you feasibly can possibly do in your yard, and have its own hive tool, its own hive stand. You don't have to have your own smoker, but maybe let's check that hive last. If you have 4, you know are healthy, you're going in, let's check this new one last. Change gloves in between, or have your own set of leather gloves for that hive. So meeting as many of those quarantine principles as we can, and treating that animal as, we don't have to treat it that we know it's sick, but that there's a possibility that it could have something we don't want to take to the known healthy ones. Yeah.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
You got it.
David, I want to do follow up a little bit out that. Is there any way that the Humboldt County Beekeeper Association, talking about me and the board, help you with finding an alternative for burning the infected hives? I know the one we did was very successful, and then you had a new fire commissioner that said they wouldn't do it, but it is a state law that they need to be burned. So in Humboldt County, we need to have some. Would it be advantageous to reopen the discussion maybe with the county supervisor and say that we need to find some kind of a method?
That would be a good start, I think. Yeah, I mean, we've talked with Rex, and you know, he wasn't able to immediately find anything, but you know, maybe
it's not a high priority, I imagine that, but since it is a state law,
right,
that puts a beekeeper in a tough position.
Yeah.
And I don't know, Dr. Lindsay, how much does it cost to do a pet cream?
Yeah, so and again, these are San Francisco prices, right? The actual cremation was around $150. If we have a way to transport it, we had to spend a lot of money for just transporting it over to the crematorium. But if somebody has a truck, that saves you a lot on cost. It was about $150, and this was a 4 super deep, pretty big hive, including a flow hive that got sent.
Yeah,
The other,
we can, sorry.
oh, sorry, the other tricky thing is you have to bury it. If you're technically following the state law, you have to burn and bury on site, which I know is another prohibitive problem in many areas. Sorry, David, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, we can, our department has open bed F250 that we can certainly use if a keeper doesn't have access to a truck.
Yeah, David, I would like to reopen that this winter, so we can probably discuss, because I think since it is a state law, and what I would hate to see is somebody violate that state law.
Yeah,
in fact,
agreed.
dispose them and just take them to the dump. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. If it gets so difficult, they gotta get rid of it. It's gotta be euthanized that same evening and then sealed up tight. It can't sit there forever. So, it's a concern for the Humboldt County Beekeeper Association. I'm a member. I like to pursue it with you and see if we can find, and we can even find out to see if we have a local pet crematorium and how much they charge.
Yeah, we do have Eureka Pet Cremation. But yeah, I have no idea what they would do for that.
And that's where maybe your local veterinarian can help. I know I called our pet crematorium as a vet on behalf of the club, and it just kind of smoothed the rails a little bit in the conversation, because a lot of veterinary offices may already have a relationship with them for their own veterinary practice. And so if you do have a vet that you're collaborating with, David, and they're willing to, like, if they use the same service, help hop on the phone, that could help. Yeah.
Great.
And let's see, I think Donna Blair had a question. She wanted to know if you can use the UV light wand to disinfect leather gloves.
So not for these spores from American foul brood, unfortunately. The only thing that will kill those spores is fire, which is why we have these regulations of burning. So the UV light, we really use to diagnose, because it's going to fluoresce like a glow stick. Some pollens, but also an AFB adhered scale. Unfortunately, if you do wear your leather gloves into a hive that you then discover is ill, I would recommend throwing them away.
Or burning them, better.
But yeah, yes, actually, Janine, that's probably the better way to do it. Make sure that they are burned or completely destroyed, inaccessible to your bees. Don't turn them into your gardening gloves. Get rid of them out of your operation.
And then I think that Dick LaForge had another question.
Oh, do you want me to ask? Yeah. Being a chemist person, if you say things like, antibiotics can be found in commercial honey, a chemist is going to say, well, how often and at what levels? In other words, how significant is this? And I'm just asking you because you probably have some source of information on this. Everything is not a black and white thing. It's a matter of significance. So what can you say about that?
Yeah, so I am happy to share my reference slide after the presentation. I'll make sure that Janine has the whole slide deck to share with you all, because it does have the reference to the studies, and it will tell you, I think it was some type of chromatography. I'm not a chemist, but it will tell you exactly. You can pull up the article. You can look at the levels and the method by which they tested them, how many samples they have. I'm very happy to share that for you to be able to take a look at. Does that answer your question, Mr. LaForge?
Oh, yeah. No, that I worked in a analytical chem lab for 20 years testing for pesticides, and
There
we
you go.
tested food and agricultural things a great deal. And so, of course, being a lab, we didn't know where they came from or what their significance was in the real world because we weren't supposed to know. You know, it was a matter of not having any bias. Um, but I would certainly understand these things, and I think you understand why I'm asking this. So
Yes.
yeah, that would be great. I would be able to understand that and see quantitatively what kind of problem this is.
I'll make sure Janine gets the full copy of the slide deck afterwards, and that reference slide will have all of that on there for you to take a look.
Oh, okay. By the way, I just blanked. Well, just wanted to say hi and not be a black box.
Quite a shop you have there.
Oh, well, yeah. Well, it's got a microscope and a little lab and whatnot. And so here's me. Okay. Anyway, yeah. So I'm a nuts and bolts science person.
Freeman, you had a question. It says there Freeman had his hand up.
I'm so sorry. If I did not intend to raise my hand. I'm so sorry.
Oh, okay, okay.
Well, I'm wondering if anyone else has a question. I'm certainly looking forward to, you know, working toward making it easier for beekeepers to deal with American foul brood and you know, other diseases, including the EFB, because you know we generally have you know, one of each every year.
Dr. Wilson, I know a beekeeper in San Francisco, Alice Pomeroy. Wonder if you know her.
The name sounds very, very familiar. Yes.
Okay.
We have
That's all.
about 360 members in our club. So I know I haven't, did she come to the holiday party? I always go to the holiday party.
I don't know.
Okay. Yeah.
Lindsay, I have a follow-up question on you. I maybe wasn't paying attention to, but about vaccinated queens.
Mhm.
You said something. What is the success? I didn't miss the whole statistics. Is it? Do you think that will work out, or they're still in the testing, or what are the guarantees?
Oh, unfortunately, no guarantees. When they checked larvae, they gave larvae in the lab really high doses of AFB. 30 to 50% of them survived if they'd been from a vaccinated queen versus, you know, practically zero from unvaccinated. That's in the lab. When they did their field studies, they had a group of hives, 15% were positive on a PCR. That's a test that checks the little for DNA bits, super sensitive test. 15% were positive before they installed vaccinated queens in them all, and 0% were positive after. However, important piece of information to know, they also did the shook swarm method with all the hives that were positive. So we're not sure, you know, I think the vaccine is doing something, but the statistics get a little muddled when we're doing more than one thing at a time. How much was it was the shook swarm? How much was the vaccine? And so it's also important that, you know, folks are selling vaccinated queens at a premium price, but just because she's vaccinated doesn't mean she's also hygienic and gentle and a good honey producer and the other things we want. So we veterinarians are so hopeful that this vaccine will prove to really be helpful, especially for people in areas that seem to have a chronic AFB problem, to reduce the risk and the rates of it. But it's not a panacea, and we still have to have a good quality queen from a producer that then gets vaccinated. So if you're shopping for a queen, make sure it's also coming from a queen producer that you trust and has other characteristics that you like.
So let's go take this a little further. What if everybody did that? In other words, if it became a standard procedure that every where you buy your queens, they were all vaccinated. Would that reduce it over the larger scale? Would that kind of
Yeah. If the vaccine proves to be highly effective and everybody implemented it, in theory, yes. But we don't yet have the confidence in the vaccine to say that it will. I am hopeful that someday we will have that confidence in it, but we don't yet.
Okay, actually, in theory, it wouldn't, because there's feral beehives out there that can be a
No, that's
reservoir.
true.
So you're not going to vaccinate all of them.
That is very true. And so there,
I don't know
yeah.
I don't know how far this carries on. Does it carry on? Doesn't carry on multiple generations, does it?
Well, so that's the other tricky thing. It's you have to vaccinate each new queen. So let's say your queen
Yeah.
swarms and she leaves another one behind, then you have to vaccinate her. You
Right.
can't get to the feral hives, which is a very, very good point. And it has to be 7 days that she's getting this queen candy and isolated. So even myself as a veterinarian, I'm used to vaccinating things all the time. I can't purchase it to give it to my bees, right? I would have
right.
to purchase this particular queen and renew her every year.
Right, you have to chuck out all your home raised queens that are locally adapted,
Yes.
which is something that we are kind of think is a good idea to have.
Yes. So if you are in an area that has a high risk, if you are doing higher risk activities like moving your bees across the country, it might be worth it to you. If you have wonderful locally adapted queens and you're in a isolated area and you practice good biosecurity, you have to weigh the economics and the effort about whether it's worth it for your operation.
And Mary she has her hand raised.
I raised my hand, yes. This
Mary's a
does
chemist too, by
anyone
the way, so watch out.
what
I
does
say Mary-
anyone look at tracing? So when AFB is reported, is there any element of tracing that's also done, and or looking at, like, I guess the high risk areas have already been identified, but then is there anything that's done beyond that? Like, if an area is known to be high risk, like an area of the state of California, then sale of or transfer of colonies from out of that area should be limited in some way, or efforts would be ramped up in that. Is there any, or is there really no point in doing that because it wouldn't really work, and the best bang for your buck is to just really effectively treat and burn each new case?
Right. So any information collection on tracing that way would probably be held at the state level, because it's also, in some ways a privacy concern, and there is some stigma. Because let's say you did everything you should, and your bees went and robbed your neighbors who left a dead out and didn't know. Is that your fault, and should you be chastised as a beekeeper? No, you were doing everything you should. These animals sometimes do things we don't intend and they get sick, and it's not your fault. At a state level, I do think they have some tracking of these sorts of things. But I guess the best advice I can say to that is, if you're gonna purchase bees, know who you're getting them from, right? Have a relationship with them. If you're a beekeeper, encourage your neighbors to all be good beekeeping neighbors and reduce the risk for everybody else, because this is a community effort for the area, right? And there's always that wild hive, or there's always that one thing somebody forgot, and they didn't do it with ill intent, it just happened. But hopefully we can destigmatize the, oh no, I don't want anybody to know I feel like a dirty beekeeper. That's not what's happening here, right? The animals do what the animals are going to do, and then we do what we can to try to keep them healthy for us. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Yeah.
any more questions? Hi, Janine, you got yourself muted. There you go. Anybody got any more questions? Doesn't sound like it. So Dr. Lindsay Wilson,
Okay,
thank you for your excellent presentation. And
That
we're going to
was
have an
awesome.
education committee established here. And then as we flesh out our next year's program, hopefully we will find a spot for you.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you all for spending your evening with me tonight. It was a delight to get to talk to you all. And I'd love to come visit Humboldt County
Our
and come up
pleasure.
for fun. So it'd be great to see you all in person.
And good luck
Our
on getting
pleasure.
your
You were
capstone.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think
yeah.
you have it.
Thank you.
This
Thanks,
is a
Janine.
wonderful presentation. And we look forward to further updates.
Of course.
Oh, I hope you
Thank you
do get
so
to
much,
come up
Janine.
here.
Thank you.
Gotta go wash my bee suit now.
Yeah, really.
I wash mine, but they still look dirty.
well, stains don't count. That means you're a real beekeeper.
Yes.
Hmm.
And can I ask you, where do you keep your bees in the Bay Area?
Yeah, I have two quietly in my backyard. And then I also keep some bees at Florence Bank Community Farms. It's an urban farm here down by the Bay Shore. We have 7 there right now.
Nice.
So there's 2 in your backyard. Are they considered urban, kind of urban hives?
Yes, I'm right by Market Street. Don't tell the neighbors. So
Okay.
no one knows they're there except the ag commissioner because they're registered, but the neighbors don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you
Just be
can't
sure to give
see
them a little
'em,
jar
you
of honey.
can't complain. I understand, but I do know that San Francisco was one of the early cities to legalize urban beekeeping.
Yes.
Very good.
Again, thank you for presentation.